Good evening, and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay family, we are rising out of the ashes together. Our topic on tonight is identity. You are not your situation, and don't define yourself by what you are going through. We have with us our co-host, Jennifer Peterkin, and our guest for the evening is Donna Drennan. Luv Bay, I want to start with responding to or mentioning a response that we got to last week's topic. And actually, my friend Eddie Neves, who was with us a couple of weeks ago, he reached out with a note. The topic on last week was domestic violence resources, substance abuse, and recovery. And Eddie pointed out that substance abuse is also used as a coping mechanism. So there are some individuals who are dealing with domestic violence or sexual assault or any other trauma, and they actually use substance abuse as a way to manage and get through their situations. So that was an awesome point that Eddie brought up, and I really wanted to share that. And so I want to also share again this resource, the National Helpline for Substance Abuse Mental Health Services. This is in the United States, and that number is 800-662-4357. And I thank you again, Eddie, for giving us that note. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for our guest or co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. And if you have any resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, or local organizations, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. And with that, Jen, would you greet our listeners for this evening?
Sure. Good evening, Luv Bay family. I'm so happy to be back again. My name is Jennifer Peterkin. As Tia said, I'm one of the co-hosts periodically here on Suffering in Silence. I am here because I went through my own domestic violence situation, and after being fortunate enough to get out of that, I became a domestic violence advocate. So now I'm doing this show, I'm doing some other things in my community, but I also have started a project called The Human Experience, just about telling stories and how stories are just such a huge part of humanity and who we are as people and how we see the world. So if you'd like to follow me along on that project, you can follow me on Instagram at GetTheHX, or you can go to my website, www.getthehx.com. And I'm actually getting ready to leave for Kenya on Sunday. So if you want to follow on that journey, definitely tune in.
Awesome, Jen. You just got back from Egypt, right?
In March.
Beautiful. I have to go with you on one of these trips, Jen.
Definitely. Let's do it.
So, Donna, would you please introduce yourself to our listeners on this evening?
Sure. Well, and I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, and I just appreciate how both of you have used your journey and your healing story to help others, and that you've shared what you've learned and what God's done in your life to really help others, and it's really an inspiration. So my name is Donna Drennan. I'm a licensed clinical social worker outside of the Philadelphia area, or in the Philadelphia area. And I've been in private practice now for about 15, 16 years. And before that, I worked in the foster care system for about 10 years, helping children and their families in that system. So I'm delighted to be here, and I hope that I can help share some information.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, listeners, as usual, we want to start with sharing a couple resources. First, we have in Australia the National Family Violence Counseling Service. Their website is www.1800respect.org.au. Their phone number is 1-800-737-732. We have the Canadian Women's Foundation. Their website is canadianwomen.org. Their phone number is 1-866-293-4483. And we have Befrienders Volunteer Action to Prevent Suicide. To find a helpline by country, you can visit their website, www.befrienders.org. And so, listeners, our topic again on tonight is identity. You are not your situation. Don't define yourself by what you are going through. And it was really impressed upon me to start this evening by saying that we understand that it is very easy to speak words. It is very easy to give direction or give instruction. But we understand that it takes work to make progress in your healing journey. And if nobody else understands that, Jennifer and I do wholeheartedly. We understand. So when we speak, when we share, and not just tonight, but all our past episodes, when we share, we're sharing from a place of understanding. We're sharing from a place of compassion. We're sharing from an intimate place. We know we've walked this journey and we're still walking it right now. So, I wanted to say that because this topic is, I think it could be, I don't know. I think we could really get tangled up in there when we're talking about identity. It can get sticky. So I just wanted to say that we understand. Again, it's easy to speak words, but we know that work that has to go into your healing journey. So with that, Donna, I would ask the first question of the evening: how would an individual first be able to recognize and know who they are even before a trauma touches their life or situation? There are some people who they're just living life day to day and really don't know who they are. Like nothing's touched them yet, or they haven't gotten into anything. But some people really don't. It's like they're just existing. I like what I like because somebody else likes that. I do what I do because I saw somebody else do it. So how can we, recognize and know who we are?
Well, I'll start a little bit by talking just about what identity theory is. I won't get too down into the weeds about it, but it's helpful to understand a little bit what psychologists and other people have done research and discussed the idea of identity. So Eric Aaron, the famous psychologist, describes identity as a response to the question, who am I? And in general, it denotes an integrated, cohesive sense of self that develops as we age. So we begin to form identity at an early age, but often, sometimes it's helpful light. Our identity might not be, depending on the attachment issues we have at an early age, whether our primary caregivers have allowed us to have a secure attachment, whether we began to learn how to self-regulate. That's also part of what primary caregivers provide us with. Many theories attribute, or they suggest, that true identity develops during adolescence, that's where it really begins. We really begin to define ourselves outside of the family. And that's often the time where we begin to develop romantic relationships, for good and for bad, right? Identity formation is an important part of achieving well-being, which is part of what you're talking about. To understand who you are is important. So exploration and commitment are aspects of identity formation. And again, I don't want to get too heavily into theory, but essentially what that is that we explore possibilities. Sometimes in adolescence, we might even try on personalities or ideas, and then we may choose them. And that's what we could refer to as commitment, that we begin to make some identification as. For some, you hear the stories of, I'm a musician, I'm the band kid, or I'm the jock, I'm the athlete. So that's an example. But again, that's not our, I don't believe that to be our deepest identity and our truest self. But as we develop this identity, much of what we learn and accept is what other people see in us or say about us. And that's particularly important because at times what's been reflected back to us may not be helpful, right? And it may even be detrimental, so that many people's identities have already been damaged before they even enter into, as you said, before they enter into a traumatic situation, they may have already had identity issues because of that. But you make a really good point about awareness, and that is something I can talk about, later, but that I do believe is essential as we work on healing our identity and tuning into our identity, that we grow in awareness of our own self, our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, and our needs. That's really essential. Does that give you, does that answer? I know it's kind of theory-based, but I think it's helpful to stick with that initially to kind of get, a basic understanding and definition of, so what is identity?
Yeah. So as you said, awareness. So as it helps to be aware of ourself, our thoughts, our emotions, is it also helpful to be aware of what hurts us? What we don't like, what may frighten us, what may turn us off?
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to say. When you consider the idea of how to separate your identity from your current situation, one of the things that you need to do is to develop the skill set of tuning into yourself. Okay. And that, like you said, that is recognizing your own feelings and preferences. And as you said at the beginning, this takes time and practice. So I was actually thinking, I took a walk before I tuned in here. And when I take an evening walk with my dog, I take that opportunity to pay attention to what's going on inside of me. So we could even take a second now. You and the listeners can pause and take 30 seconds and think, what am I feeling? So I could share, I have a little bit of nervousness. I'm here on a radio show live. I have joy at the idea of sharing this information and seeing you two. And, there's a little excitement. So that, and what am I thinking? I'm thinking, I hope this information is helpful. I hope that I say what it is I had wanted to say. So that's just a little glimmer of a moment of tuning into yourself. What are you feeling? And many, many people don't know how to do that. They've never been helped to learn how to do that. And the other important thing is people who've experienced abuse and trauma, they can feel numb and invisible and passive, right? Those are some of the results possibly, or also some learned behavior that maybe has already happened before they've gotten into a situation like that. And there are strong feelings that may be difficult to tune into too. Feelings of guilt or shame, or, many times in an abusive situation, you may be blamed for all the problems. So to pause and take a minute to tune into how you're feeling might seem really scary. And overwhelming. I don't know that I want to know what I'm feeling, right? And and as you said, in order to eventually be able to use your voice to speak out about your own needs and your own preferences, you need to begin to identify what those things are. And that does take time. And it certainly is a process of learning that.
So I just listening to you, I have one more question, and then Jen, you can throw in a question or a comment. But not wanting to tune in or don't wanting to know your emotions, or not wanting to delve deeper into what you're thinking or feeling, trying to avoid that. Can you speak to how that can be damaging when you try to ignore it or pretend it's not there, or like stay away from it?
Yes, because you can't. So that's really the bottom line is we like to run away from it. I love the saying of emotions can't drive the car, but you can't shove them in the trunk either. It's not going to work. They will catch up. If you picture a strong emotion, shoving it into a box or something like that, eventually it will come out sideways and upside down. And the challenge with that is if you're not dealing directly with your emotions and then sharing your emotions or your thoughts and feelings directly, then you're also not able to develop strong communication with other people, not only with yourself, but then you're not identifying what it is that you want to share with people. But yeah, you're right. You can't, it will catch up. And as you were saying at the very beginning, you know, substance abuse is a coping mechanism. So many coping mechanisms are designed to numb. And what are we numbing? We're numbing the pain, whether we're shopping or drinking or eating or oversleeping or whatever we're doing, sexual addictions, all of those things. Coping, we use coping mechanisms because they work. Even the bad ones work temporarily, but they don't work long term. And that pain it's going to go there. It's going to be there until it gets processed. And as the two of you can really attest to, in processing the pain, you've now then been able to help other people and use that pain for good, as opposed to allowing it to destroy you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jen, you want to?
Done. We're done.
Right? We should go home now.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying, Donna, about when you're in a trauma relationship, traumatic situation, and you don't want to process your emotions. I think another part of that can be like not trusting your emotions at that point too, like being involved in trauma and feeling so upside down, and you don't know which way is up, and you don't even feel like a person anymore. And so, you know, trying to process in that mindset can be really difficult because you're constantly second guessing yourself.
That's exactly.
Yeah. So how, like, with trauma, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, I'm just going all the way in, but how do you begin to even do that when you feel like you can't even trust your own mind?
Well, and I do think, you know, as you both know, it can require support and help as you, depending on where you are in the recovery process, how early you are in the stages of leaving the abusive relationship. At the very beginning, you might really, really need validation. And that's one of the most important things that you really need, is for somebody to tell you you're not crazy. We throw around that word gaslighting a lot. And I don't know if you guys have defined it, or if people understand what it is, where it comes from, the movie Gaslight. Like, why do we throw that term around? It is very helpful to understand. So you guys have talked about it and explained what that is. Okay. Yeah. It's helpful to understand. So if essentially you're just being told for a long period of time that what you feel or what you believe or what you're experiencing isn't true, then of course you're going to have a tremendous amount of self-doubt and second guessing. If you say, I'm feeling really cold, and the person next to you says, you're not cold, then, you know, like, oh, I'm not. You know, that makes it feel simple. I mean, that's a simple explanation, but sometimes it is that simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or, you know, I'm really tired, or I'm feeling very sad, or whatever it is. That's never validated. So initially coming out of a situation where you have been told what to think, what to feel, what to believe, what you do or don't want, then it really does take time for you to begin that process of being able to identify. And it may be as simple as the very basic feelings. Sometimes what I've done when I've worked with people is, let's start with a feelings chart. And you can get those feelings charts with all the faces. They're kind of like emojis, but they're a little more in depth. But let's look at, so what does sadness feel like? What does it look like? When has there been a time in your life when you felt sad? So you really might need to start with the very basics. But like I said, I think very much what people need is validation and acknowledging that what has happened to you has not been helpful to to form your identity, to separate yourself. Like it will be a challenge for you to extricate yourself from those patterns. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And you're just like, you're really bringing me back here. So, but this is like all stuff that, you know, you do at the beginning, and it sounds, so Donna, you were the first person that that identified gaslighting for me. I had never heard the term before. And it was a really like surreal thing to come to terms with, because it sounds really silly until you're actually in it, because you think somebody telling you you're not cold when you've clearly said I am cold sounds like the dumbest thing to get caught up in. Like, that's not real. That doesn't, like, how can you actually come into that way of thinking? But people don't realize that when repetition is involved, especially repetition and isolation, like your brain is just trying to survive, and there is no, there's no out in that situation. So being able to identify these terms, I think ahead of time, like I hope people that are in traumatic relationships already are listening and gaining something from this. But I also hope that this show is an education tool to prevent stuff like that from happening. And, you know, it's not foolproof and, you know, whatever, but I think it is important to clarify what those are, what that is, and how it can really mess with your mind.
Absolutely. And that does take time, as we've said again and again, but it's so important to know that you're not hard on yourself as you're detangling those knots in your brain. And you know, when I've talked about neural pathways that get formed when you think the same thing over and over and over again, it's like a super highway in your brain that your brain is just going to go to. So learning new ways of thinking about yourself takes time. And it does take people around you, I think, to help speak the truth about your situation and about who you are.
Mm-hmm. So, Donna, I would ask, how do you not allow your situation or the trauma to define you? How do you not allow what it is that you're going through to define the person that you are? So now, for me, I know as I was, you know, going through my situation, that voice of validation for me was you. So there were times that I sat in front of Donna, and I mean, I tried to be as clear as possible, as open as possible. Like, look, this is exactly what happened, A, B, C, and D. Because I felt like I was crazy. Something's wrong with me. But I needed to hear Donna say, no, A did happen. B did happen. You have a right to feel about, you know, however you feel about C. So for me, I had to step outside of my environment, and I had to find help, and my help was through Donna. So in Luv Bay, I share all the time. I have 2 counselors. I have a Christian counselor, which is Donna, and I have a counselor who specializes in domestic violence. So for me, I had to step outside of my circle because I wasn't getting what I needed. Yep. I wasn't. So can you tell the listeners, you know, how do you not allow your situation or the trauma to define you? Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's when, for me, I think we step into a little bit of the theological and the faith-based, because we are so much more than, first of all, what we do, what our roles are, whether we're a wife, a mother, a sister, a student, you know, whatever it is that we are, we're so much more than what we do. And we're so much more, so many people also define their identity through their circumstances, whether it's their possessions or, you know, it could be their job, it could be their where they live. All of those situations change. They're not the solid rock of our identity. And the deepest truth about anyone's identity is that they're a beloved child of God. Unconditionally, unequivocally, abundantly, deeply. No matter what, right? And this is not dependent on any behavior, any circumstances. And many people maybe have heard that truth, but they haven't actually experienced the truth of that. And the reason why I talk about that is, and that even, what I appreciate about the two of you is both of you were in, churches where that you were supposed to be supported and understood. And while you maybe had heard that truth, you still weren't getting the help that you needed to validate the situation that you're in. And here's the essential piece to that is every person has a fundamental dignity, period. Yeah. So every life is valuable, period. Yes. Every single person deserves to be treated with respect. And so I know we're talking about identity, but as you both well know, boundaries cannot not be talked about because so much of what, having a secure sense of self is what then allows us to set boundaries. Yeah. And that does go back to, well, what do I desire? What do I need? What do I feel? And the thing that I love about boundaries is there's both a discussion about responsibility as well as limits, one responsibility to care for themselves. So that does tie into identity. My responsibility is my behavior. Is my behavior, is my feelings, are my attitudes. Those are my responsibility to take care of, right? And another person's responsibility. So it's not my responsibility to take care of somebody else's attitudes and feelings and desires.
Yes.
But I know we're getting into another area, but it does blend together in understanding, again, how do I separate myself from what's going on?
Yeah. It really does tie in together. And I will tell you, Donna, anecdotally, that Tia and I have never gone to a show without talking about boundaries.
Well,
we credit that to you because that was so important. And it's essential. And I think in walking this road and to reclaim your identity, whether it's from trauma or just from not ever having this conversation before, it's important that it takes so much work to do it. So those boundaries are your protection then to make sure that work then doesn't get unraveled and undone.
Good point. Yeah. Did I answer your question, Tia?
Yes. Yes, you did. So let me share some more resources, and then I want to follow up on what you just said, Jen. So Luv Bay, we want to welcome you again to Surfing in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. We have a replay on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern, and then also Thursday and Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. I want to share with you the National Domestic Violence Hotline. This is in the United States. The website is www.thehotline.org. The phone number is 1-800-799-7233. We have Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, also known as RAIN. Their website is www.rainn.org. And the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Their phone number is 1-800-273-8255. So, Jen, before I moved on to another question, I wanted to ask Donna if you can talk a bit about what Jen just said about unraveling. There were times when I know that I made progress, within myself. But then moments will come and I felt like, all right, it's just all shot. it's over. Like it just fell apart. So there are moments when I was secure, I was strong, I know who I am, I know what I'm doing, and then moments later, I just unravel. That doesn't mean that, that strength that I had before, it was real. It was, but just going through the journey, sometimes, you're up and sometimes you're down, but when I'm up, that is real. It's not imagined, it's real. I did make progress, but I have to keep going. Sometimes you got to start over, or sometimes you got to just pick up and continue. So can you talk about that unraveling? Like that's, I guess what I'm trying to say is that unraveling is normal and it's okay. And it doesn't mean, that you've messed up or that you did something wrong.
Did you want me to talk about it or Jen?
Yes. Well, both. You first and then.
Okay. Well, I think it's helpful in any healing journey, anytime I do therapy with anybody, that we remember that it isn't linear. No healing goes from just A to B. And because we can go deeper as we encounter experiences. You could have an experience that could trigger something from your childhood that you haven't paid attention to, that you weren't aware of, and you hit a pocket of pain, and you need to take the time to work that through. And again, that does take a degree of skill set and support to help you work that through. But that's an example where you might, quote unquote, become unraveled because you've come up against some trauma from your history, or a memory, that just has affected you. Or like you said, you might just have a bad day, as we all do. But truth is truth. And that's where, we've talked a lot about taking our thoughts captive, and what does that look like, that we pay attention to what it is that we're thinking, because you could be thinking something and find yourself down a pit, a spiral. Your thoughts could have gone down a spiral because you didn't realize for the past hour, maybe you've been beating yourself up internally, or you've been thinking about all the problems that you have. And that's where the practice of paying attention to your thoughts and, focusing on the truth about who you are and being loved, and all of those truths with a capital T, can ground you in that. When you do begin to get unraveled, you can find your footing again by getting back to some of those truths.
Yeah. Jen?
Yeah. I think it's really important, like Donna said, but just to reiterate that healing isn't linear. So, that's what therapy is, right? Is the tool, having the tools to be able to cope in a healthy way, or to move through your life in a way that is healthy and functional. And obviously nobody's perfect at it and gets it right 100% of the time, but it can feel really disorienting and really discouraging when you put so much time into something and so much effort into something, and it all seems that in one day it's all gone away, and you feel like you've taken 100 steps backward, and you haven't really. It's just that day or that moment. And so from a personal perspective, I can say that if you keep putting in the work, those moments get further and further apart.
Yes,
and they get shorter and shorter when dealing with trauma. So it is important to put in the work, because even though you will have those times when you start to unravel, because we're not living in some perfect oasis world where everything is always going to be okay, it's still important to put that work in and to use those practical applications, because you're going to move down the road of your life and look back and realize how far you've come. And a big part of that is going to be because of the work that you put in along that journey.
Yes. So thank you for your responses. So Donna, now I want to ask you, for our listeners, how can you separate your identity from your situation? For instance, how can you clearly see yourself as the true person that you are, while also acknowledging that I'm dealing with this trauma? I'm dealing with domestic violence, but that's not who I am. So
That's
for
right.
me, I fought with, in my mind, I do not want to be known as, the face of domestic violence. That was a real thing for me. As I was coming through and dealing with my issue, I did not want people to look at me and that's the first thing that they say. Like, that's what they recognize me for. I didn't want that. I knew that was not all there was to me. That was something that I had to deal with. It's something that's a part of my life. But I didn't want that to overshadow me. And that's something that I had to fight with in my mind. So is there something that we can do, or a process to go through, that will actually help us to separate our identity from the situation? Like, I have to acknowledge it, but it's not me. That's not who I am.
Right. Well, I think so much of it is just doing what you just said, is really identifying what is the truth. And in any situation, we're not defined by our circumstances ever. So, somebody that struggles with anxiety, I work with a lot of clients that have anxiety, and I try and remind them, you are not an anxious person. You struggle with anxiety. So I don't even like that definition, right? Like, if somebody has cancer, they are not cancer, right? And so it is important that we do separate ourselves from any circumstance. Again, like I was saying about, the roles that we play in life. I may be a mother, but I'm not just a mother. That doesn't define me. It's an aspect of who I am. But it's so essential that we continue to grow in understanding who we are as a person. Again, as a person of faith, I believe that's in relationship to God. Who am I in relationship to God? And He alone can tell me who I am. Other people maybe have opinions, and they might help to form some of my identity, but they can't tell me who I am in the end. And if I'm looking for other people to tell me who I am, that really is never going to work well. That's never going to it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be the rock solid truth, right? And that's where codependency comes in, where people are looking for other people to define them and tell them who they are. So I do think it is very much what you're saying, Tia, just that continual, examining your thoughts, examining what's going on in your heart and your mind, taking the time to look at that and think, am I defining myself by my circumstances? Am I identifying as one who is abused, as opposed to, I am a beautiful, beloved daughter of God. That's who I am. And right now I'm in a situation that I'm going to get out of, right? But that doesn't define who I am. But you're right. You continue to need people to remind you of that truth, I think. I think all these questions kind of connect together. I don't know that they're really, separate. I think we keep going back to the truth of that. But again, as Jen said, like, the more you practice that, the more it becomes part of how you care for yourself. I think the truer that becomes. And I did want to talk, that's, I think, one of the things we were going to talk about, but I did want to talk about self-care at some point too.
Yes.
So do you want me to talk about it now?
So Jen, do you want to add to that, or, Donna can just go into self-care? You want to add to that first?
Well, I guess you briefly touched on codependency, and I guess I wanted to just add to that, because I think so much of when you're you don't have to be walking through trauma to like have codependent tendencies, but I think it makes you especially vulnerable to codependent tendencies after you've been through trauma, because especially for somebody in a domestic violence situation, after you extricate yourself from that, hopefully, you kind of find yourself in this position of like, I don't trust myself. I don't know who to trust. I've been living with this person who has been controlling every aspect of my life and who has been telling me what to do and who to be. I kind of feel like I still need that in some way. And so it's really easy, especially if you are not processing your trauma, to get into a relationship, whether it's romantic, a friendship, somebody in your family, where you are kind of experiencing that again in a little bit of a different way, but it presents as codependency. So you need somebody else to kind of hold your hand and tell you what to do and who to be. And I think that when you haven't processed your trauma, that can feel like a comfort and very comfortable. But it's just kind of a different side of the same coin, right? Like there's no health in that. There's no longevity in that. And eventually you're going to get to a point where your identity runs up against the wall of somebody else's expectations and they're going to crash. So, you said codependency and I was like, yeah, that really does tie into identity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, having somebody who's a little more objective in your life, especially initially as you're processing this stuff, to be able to remind you, okay, let's look at this relationship that you're in now. If it is, as you said, like a friendship that you're developing after having left a domestic violence situation, having an objective person be able to process or to discuss what's going on in that friendship to help you work through, is this healthy? Isn't this healthy? Do you know who you are in this relationship? Have you lost yourself again? And it does take time. I know we've said this so many times, but it's really important to be patient with yourself as you are growing in learning who you are and what you like and don't like and what your feelings are and what your thoughts are. It does take time. And it's so important that you also are in some kind of relationship where somebody is listening to those things for you and maybe asking those questions. How are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? What are you thinking? And even if initially it's a therapist or a counselor or some other person who is not necessarily a friend who's doing that can begin to help you move in that direction of identifying and validating those parts of yourself. But to talk about self-care is connected to the idea of self-worth and what I said about everybody, has intrinsic value and dignity. And that being true, then everybody also is worth being cared for, which means yourself. So you are worth being cared for. And as you grow in identifying your own needs and thoughts and desires, some of that happens as you care for yourself. So oftentimes I may speak to a client about, so what do you enjoy? What do you want to do? What do you want to spend time doing? Do you want to go out and work in the garden? Do you want to paint? How will you find rest? And how can you become creative in your life? Those things really matter as part of the healing process as we're restored. The basics, enough sleep, eating well, getting exercise, rest, which isn't sleep, but is rest. We really, in America at least, I don't know Canadian culture, but probably similar, we are so focused on production and just accomplishing so much that we really don't remember to rest and to value rest. It's so important to take the time to rest so that you do have the opportunity to connect with yourself even, right? And to begin to learn, what is it that I want to do with my time? What is it that I enjoy? Resiliency has been defined as the ability to succeed in the face of adversity. And as you develop the ability to care for yourself, so your resiliency will grow. And that's such an essential skill and, an essential aspect of survival, right? And is to really develop resiliency. And I think we've lost some resiliency in our culture, and it's important to invest. So what does that look like? I mean, that's a whole other separate conversation, but part of growing in resiliency is taking care of yourself.
Yeah. So for me, and Donna, you may be able to explain this better than what I'm getting ready to, how I'm getting ready to say it. But for me, there were times during my journey, it wasn't straight through, but there were specific times in my journey where I could not take care of myself the way that I needed to and the way that I wanted to, but I was able to help others. And for me, there were specific times that helping others made me feel better. And so I am not telling anyone, do not ignore your circumstances and focus on something else. That's not what I did. I wasn't looking for something to I wasn't pretending that I wasn't going through what I was going through. Mm-hmm. But there were specific times when I could help someone else in their situation, be it helping someone with their children, helping someone with herself. It actually made me feel better because I couldn't do the things that I knew I needed to do and wanted to do for myself. So can you put words to that in a way that...
Yeah. Well, I think anytime we can connect outside of our situation, that can also be helpful, right? Where we see another person's need. Again, not that I'm encouraging no boundaries and codependency. You guys know that, but sometimes service can move us past ourselves and our own world, even, where we even can recognize, wait a minute, I'm not even caring for myself, or I'm not being cared for in the way that I want to care for these other people here, right? Mm-hmm. Like it can just even open your eyes. But I think it's also validating for who we are as people when we connect like that with other people. And when we are actually, maybe what you were doing, Tia, is, and you're recognizing somebody else's worth and their dignity and offering to serve them, it was just helping to clarify for you your own value and worth, right? And just beginning to put your head back on straight of what matters in the world and what matters in life. Because you absolutely believe that, Tia. You absolutely, your heart has always been to do more, and to serve God and to do what you were called to do. And so that drove you, but I think being limited by your circumstances, maybe that was part of how you felt better, because you were also seeing there's more to my life than what I'm doing, and I want to be doing more. Yeah.
So Jen, you want to add to that, or you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I think too, kind of going back to what you said, we're talking about earlier, Tia, about not being defined by your situation, that not being your identity. I think definitely getting outside of yourself and gaining a larger perspective can certainly help with that. And I know, like, for me personally, that's also been a huge thing in my life, and is stepping outside of my bubble and where I am kind of ruminating on my situation and just like letting it go for a little bit. Now, of course, there's always ways to do things in an unhealthy or dysfunctional way. So be careful, or make sure you're still putting the other work in, or you're talking to that objective party, or you're talking to a therapist as you're doing these things. But I think certainly they can be really important and helpful for your journey.
Yes. So you have another question, Jen, that you want to go into?
So I guess, what do you say, Donna, to people who are trying to walk through this and figure out their identity and who they are, and they don't know who to surround themselves with, or they're not sure how to approach their family and friends about that? How do family and friends support somebody in their journey, specifically talking through a trauma lens? And is it necessary for somebody to seek out therapy?
Well, I think therapy is good for everyone.
I mean, so do I. It was kind of a trick question. I think therapy is necessary, but
I'm gonna be subjective in that. But it may not look like traditional therapy. I actually think I do. My friends tease me. I do some free therapy for a lot of my friends because you may have a very healthy relationship where that person is really speaking the truth to you and is challenging you in a way that's helpful and is supportive of you. But I think in general, you're going to need some kind of an objective person to help walk through some of these things. I know we'd mentioned boundaries before. I don't know that we can talk about relationships without mentioning boundaries again.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to briefly define it that so healthy boundaries define what is me and what is not me. That's a simple explanation. And they keep the good in and the bad out. Mm-hmm. Okay. So supportive relationships, we want them to fall into that arena, I guess I want to say. So is the relationship that you're in, well, and you made reference to this earlier, Jen, that if you are of a compliant personality, or so a compliant person, they're how do I explain this? They can't say no, and they almost maybe So Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend are the ones that I'm kind of getting some of this information about. I know I'm stuttering here, but I wanted to give that clarification. They would be the ones that I would say are the experts on boundaries. I would look up their book, look up their material, and they talk about this compliant personality. And what can happen, a compliant person can almost melt into the demands and needs of others, mm-hmm. so that it's very difficult for them to separate themselves from that. So that's why we're talking a little bit about being cautious. And many compliant people realize too late that they are in an abusive relationship, right? So again, even with developing friendships and support, getting out of a domestic abuse situation or violent situation, you want to be clear that, okay, am I establishing healthy boundaries in these relationships? Am I able to say no where I need to say no? And part of exploring that is also looking at, okay, what drives that behavior? So for instance, what drives my inability to say no? Is it fear? Is it fear of abandonment? Is it fear of rejection? And again, that's where processing some of that with either a therapist or another person can help you make different decisions. When you begin to identify what's driving the behavior, you can then begin to change the behavior. So yeah. I'm looking at time, Tia, to give you a chance to.
Oh no, I mean,
the very end here.
I agree. I mean, whenever boundaries come up, my ears perk up and I just listen. But yeah. I did have a thought. I just thought about being honest with yourself. You have to be honest. Why are you doing what you do? Why are you going where you go? Do you really like what it is that you're doing and saying, or are you doing it because you want to be like someone else? Are you doing it because you want their approval? So I really think there are times I think we have to do a self-inspection, and we just have to sit with ourselves, by ourselves, and be honest. Why are you doing what you're doing? because if it's because you're trying to get someone else's approval, that's a problem. If you're doing it because of fear, because this person is making you do it, that's a problem. And if you don't know why, then that's a problem, because you have control over yourself, your thoughts, your emotions. So I think you have to be honest. And I think the point when you're being honest, and if you look yourself in a mirror and you can answer those questions to yourself about yourself, I think that's a starting point where you can move forward and start to establish and own your identity. Even if you don't like the answers, even if you don't like what you see and what you feel, it's the truth. But you can do something with the truth. So I was just listening, and I just thought about that, just being honest with yourself.
Yeah. I also think that if you are that compliant person, or you've been in that trauma relationship where this has just become so, like, a lack of boundaries has become so normalized for you. And even when you're in the place where you can be honest with yourself, it doesn't make setting the boundaries easy.
Yeah.
And so, speaking from personal experience, it can feel like you're being mean. It can feel like you're being selfish. And that's just a skewed value system. Like, that's just a skewed vision of value system, right? And so you have the ability, and not only the ability, but you're allowed to put yourself, I don't want to say put yourself first, but you're allowed to put yourself in a position where you can take care of yourself. And so even when you are there and, like, intellectually, that, it can be really difficult still to emotionally get there and say, I'm comfortable putting this boundary, or you may even have to do it uncomfortable. But just because it doesn't feel nice all the time doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that is a hugely valid point. And I will also say that, I specifically remember, the moments in myself when I began to stand up for myself, when I began to take control of me. My ex-husband actually said to me, well, now you're abusing me. Because I stood up for myself, because I, started taking control of me, my mind, my thought, my emotions, because I started setting boundaries. He literally said to me, well, now you're abusing me. And so that's a part of it too. So when you start to stand up for yourself, you may feel that, you're being aggressive, but you're not. You're taking care of yourself. And then also you may be accused of being aggressive, but you're not. You're taking care of yourself. So,
and it's that other person's responsibility to take care of themselves.
Yes.
And that's the issue is, part of, my responsibility is to take care of my own feelings. If I don't take care of myself, then it's going to be a problem. And if that other person isn't taking care of him or herself, that's a problem. Yes. Right?
Yeah. So as we are just under the hour, I want to give you both just some final comments for tonight. So Jen, you want to leave us with some final words, and then Donna, you can close us out for the evening.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, I'm sitting here thinking about my journey walking through all of this, because this was all so relevant in my life for such a long period of time. Like, it was at the forefront of my mind all of the time. And I just want to reiterate that we've said it a couple of times tonight. None of this is easy. It is work, and it takes you continually showing up to do it. But it can feel very slow when you're walking through this journey, but it is possible, and healing is possible. Happiness is possible. You will eventually see the fruits of your labor, but that doesn't mean that any of us are sitting here at any point going, I don't understand. It's really simple. All you have to do is this, and this, and you're done. You're healed. That's just not the reality of healing at all. And trauma is real. It's serious, and it lingers and it stays with you. But there are tools and resources available that are just really important. So seek them out. And even if you are not directly affected, just being aware of what is out there and what's available is important. But yeah, and then the last thing I'll say is I'm just so happy you were here, Donna. You've been so instrumental in my life and my healing, and I'm just so glad that you got to share with everybody.
Thank you. So Donna,
well,
I'll give you the last word.
It's a privilege to be here, and I guess the only thing I'd want to say is everybody out there listening, you are worth being healed and whole and being restored, and the world needs your recovery. The world needs what you have to give. You're worth it. So do what you need to do and be blessed.
Thank you. Ladies, thank you both so much for being with us. Luv Bay, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from our program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We want to thank you for joining Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Luv Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Good evening.